All right, brand new information this hour from Sarah Carter, who will join us in a minute. She's reporting that the House Intel Committee Chair, Devin Nunes, is now asking former top Obama administration officials for answers about how much the former president knew about the Clinton bought and paid for dossier and when he found out about it. Now, this is the dossier that was filled with Russian government lies. Of course, Clinton used it to try and influence and manipulate the minds of the American people. This is the one the FBI relied heavily on to get that FISA warrant to spy on the Trump campaign associate, Carter Page, during an election year. Now, Sarah Carter's reporting that Congressman Nunes, he has sent letters to many unnamed former senior Obama officials in an attempt to find out the extent of their knowledge about the phony dossier. We have been saying on this program for months now that we want to know what former Obama officials like John Brennan, James Clapper, Susan Rice, the new queen of unmasking, Samantha Power, and Ben Rhodes, and President Obama, what they knew when they knew it. And Sarah Carter has also obtained a list of questions that the Chairman Nunes, wants answers to. Here are the most pertinent ones. We'll put them on the screen. When and how did you first become aware of any of the information contained in the Steele dossier? Now, congressional investigations have uncovered that the Obama FBI, DOJ, and even the State Department of Obama all either were given the dossier or were told about what was in the dossier. So the number of people potentially involved is vast and it is widespread. Now, the next question. Who did you share this information with, when, and in what form? Please describe each and every instance. Now, remember, before President Obama left office, remember he amended that executive order 12333? That made it easier to share information across 17 government intelligence agencies. By the way, he never worked under this executive order. The next question. When did you first learn or come to believe that the Steele dossier was funded by the Democratic National Committee and the Clinton campaign? Now, Hillary and the DNC, of course, Donna Brazile told us she was controlling the money at the DNC. They paid over, what, $12 million for these Russian lies, government lies, propaganda to propagandize the American people, influence the election? Another question asking, when did you first become aware that the Steele dossier was used to obtain a FISA order on Carter Page? Now, we now know from two Republican memos that the dossier to spy on Carter Page, Trump associate, was first granted in October of 2016 before the election. It was renewed 3 times afterwards, and yet people like James Comey, Andrew McCabe, Sally Yates, Rod Rosenstein. Oh, and we can't forget Lisa Page and her boyfriend. And then, of course, Dana Bente. Now, we also know that McCabe testified without the dossier, that application for that FISA warrant never would have been approved. And speaking of the application, remember, in the Grassley-Graham memo, the bulk of that FISA warrant application relied on the garbage this dossier had in it that Fusion GPS and the FBI never verified. Now, that's even more troubling because under oath, remember James Comey, he said it was salacious. He said it was unverified. And he also briefed then President-elect Trump about the fake news dossier, and that was in January 2017. And he said the same thing to Donald Trump. He said it was unverified and salacious. But months earlier, in October, Comey had no problem using it to get the FISA warrant to surveil Carter Page. Now, on to the next question. This is very important. Was President Obama briefed on any information contained in the dossier prior to January 5th, 2017? Now, we know about January 5th and that meeting because the former National Security Advisor, remember Susan Rice, she's the one that sent her email to herself on President Trump's inauguration day. And on the way out of the White House, Rice is describing a meeting from January 5th, 15 days prior, when she and then Vice President Joe Biden, James Comey, the Deputy Attorney General Sally Yates, herself, and the president were all in this meeting. She stressed, oh, Barack Obama wanted everything with the Russian investigation to be done by the book. He wanted it by the book. He did not instigate this investigation. He wanted it by the book. Sounds like a CYA. And why would Rice send an email on her way out of the White House? Sounds like she's trying to cover herself and President Obama. Her attorney, of course, is saying that the email was not unusual at all. Really? You believe that? Now, Nunes is also asking those Obama officials if they had any contact with members of the media about this dossier. And we learned that the former British spy, Christopher Steele, he was briefing outlets like the New York Times, the Washington Post, Yahoo News, fake news, CNN, all about the dossier, all before the election. And Nunes is now giving these officials until March the 2nd to reply. By the way, we did reach out to former President Obama for comment. Shockingly, they never got back to us. So in addition to finding out what Obama knew when he knew it, when it comes to the dossier, we're now asking the same questions about the Russian election interference. Now, the Mueller indictment clearly lays out that this Russian interference campaign started in 2014. Donald Trump wasn't running. And we now know, despite warnings back in 2014 from people like Congressman Devin Nunes, President Obama did nothing. Now, we're calling it a dereliction of duty, especially when you consider what Obama said just a couple of weeks before the election, lecturing Donald Trump to stop whining. Take a look.
I have never seen in my lifetime or in modern political history any presidential candidate trying to discredit the elections and the election process before votes have even taken place. It's unprecedented. It happens to be based on no facts. There is no serious person out there who would suggest somehow that you could even rig America's elections. There's no evidence that that has happened in the past, or that there are instances in which that will happen this time. And so I'd advise Mr. Trump to stop whining and go try to make his case to get votes.
Now, how about you stop whining? No serious president would have ignored the warnings in 2014. They would have known that Russia was a hostile nation with a hostile actor named Vladimir Putin. Remember, Medvedev, tell Vladimir that I'll have more flexibility after the election. All right, it's time for President Obama. You got to start telling the American people what you knew when you knew it on the dossier, and especially we want to find out what the former president knew. When did he know that Hillary Clinton, the DNC, paid for these Russian lies? And did he know that the dossier was used to spy on a member of the Trump campaign in an election year? And by the way, on the issue of election interference, why didn't Obama act? Is it because he thought Hillary Clinton was going to win and he didn't care? Why be bothered? Anyway, the president has been slamming Obama on Twitter, President Trump, that is, for his response to not responding to the Russian election interference. Here's the president, President Trump's recent tweet on this topic. I have been much tougher on Russia than Obama. Just look at all the facts. Total fake news. And White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders schools the media today on how President Trump has been much tougher on Russia than Obama. Liberal media, I know you don't do any work. You may want to pay close attention, maybe learn something. Take a look.
If Russia or anybody else is trying to interfere with our elections, I think it's a horrible thing, and I want to get to the bottom of it, and I want to make sure it will never, ever happen. Now, the thing I have to mention is that Barack Obama, when he was president, found out about this. He was told in early August by presumably the CIA that Russia was trying to get involved or meddling pretty strongly with the election. He did nothing about it. The reason is he thought Hillary was going to win. And also, we can't let anybody play around with our voters and our voter system. But I have to tell you this. So important.
Now, we're going to have more examples of how Obama failed over and over again when it comes to Russia. We'll have that later in the show. This includes, of course, Uranium One. That includes allowing Vladimir Putin to wrestle control of 20% of our uranium when it's in short supply. Why would any administration let a hostile foreign actor ever do that to this country? And we've also been telling you about how it all started in 2009. You have a Putin-led Russian operatives right here on American soil. They begin operating a cell. They wanted a foothold in America's uranium market. Remember, we've been telling you about this FBI informant, Douglas Campbell. Well, he was there the entire time, documenting, uncovering everything: bribery, extortion, kickbacks, money laundering. And they did nothing. How is that possible? Now, also tonight, the special counsel, Robert Mueller, announces a new plea deal with a lawyer tied to Paul Manafort and Rick Gates. Now, the lawyer accepted this plea deal for lying, quote, to the FBI again. Oh, no collusion. And included the legal documents in it's some very interesting information, by the way. And Mueller outlines how the lawyer deleted. Oh, that sounds familiar. And didn't hand over emails that had been requested by the special counsel. Wow. Now, is Robert Mueller now setting a legal standard? Is he setting a precedent? Can we now go back and get Hillary Clinton? She deleted, she acid washed, she bleach bit, and she beat the crap out of devices with a hammer. Now, if Mueller thinks that what this lawyer did was wrong and illegal, then maybe you should take a cold, hard look at the 33,000 emails that were subpoenaed that she erased, then acid washed, then bleach bit, and then had her aides beat up with a hammer. I think that's a good start. And by the way, her team gave the FBI cell phones. We got to give them credit. Oh, the only problem is they didn't have any SIM cards in them, which basically rendered them useless. So if Mueller does care even a little bit about the equal application under the law, equal justice under the law, well, he'd be investigating Hillary Clinton for destroying evidence in an FBI investigation. And that could be just the start of Clinton's legal troubles. We told you last night about an article written by a lawyer, Robert Barnes, for the website Law and Crime. Here's the headline. Does Mueller's indictment, when you read it, mean Clinton's campaign can be indicted herself for Christopher Steele? This is a fascinating article because Barnes is pointing out that since Robert Mueller indicted Russian trolls in part for failing to register as foreign agents and for not reporting their activities to the FEC, well, not in the indictment, it is in the overall text if you actually read the indictment. Well, does that create a legal standard for Mueller to go after Christopher Steele, Fusion GPS, the law firm Perkins Coie, the DNC, and Hillary Clinton herself? Now, here's the legal reason why. Steele, he's also a foreign citizen. He was paid by Fusion GPS. We haven't seen that Steele ever registered as a foreign agent or that Steele reported to the Federal Election Commissions what he was being paid. So if we're going to go off this precedent set by the Russia indictment, all the conditions are there in this case. Robert Mueller should be investigating Steele, Clinton, Fusion GPS, Perkins Coie, the DNC, and Hillary Clinton. Isn't it about fairness and equal application of the law? If Mueller's going after Russian trolls, then maybe he'd be okay with prosecuting Steele and the people paying him to create a phony dossier full of Russian lies that they tried to use to lie to the American people. Now, Rush Limbaugh hit an amazing point on his radio show yesterday about why Mueller only indicted the Russians for certain crimes. He nails it. This is brilliant. Take a look.
The things these Russians were charged with in the Mueller indictment are wire fraud, defrauding the United States, mail fraud. These charges that the Russians were hit with in this indictment have nothing to do with the avowed purpose of the special counsel investigation. Literally nothing to do with it. And if these Russians were charged the way everybody thought charges were going to happen, then they could charge Hillary and they could charge Christopher Steele and Fusion GPS. But they can't be charged just because the Russians have been, because the charges are different.
That's why they didn't go after the FEC issues. That's why they didn't go after the FARC issue. What Russia's saying here is brilliant. It's that Mueller may have been shielding Hillary Clinton by limiting the charges announced against the Russian trolls, because all of that could have been applied to Fusion GPS, Hillary Clinton, the campaign, Perkins Coie, and the rest of them. Brilliant point. So Mueller, again, Hillary Clinton, how does she get everybody to protect her? It's always rigged in her case. Finally, tonight, we have more damning information about Mueller's top partisan attack dog, Andrew Weissman. Take a look at the headline. L.A. Times is getting on board, finally doing some reporting in the media. Mueller deputy Andrew Weissman has a reputation for hard-charging tactics and sometimes going too far. Then the LA Times details how Weissman has very close ties to the special counsel Robert Mueller, which includes serving as his FBI general counsel for 2 years. Maybe this will explain why Mueller decided to tap Weissman as his lead prosecutor, even though Weissman has the most atrocious record of any lawyer that I've ever seen in my life. We've told you how he's biased, a political partisan hack, how he's donated thousands to the Democrats, including Obama. And aside from Weissman's clear and obvious political bias, what about his track record as a prosecutor? Sarah Carter last Friday broke the story about how in a 1997 case, Weissman was officially reprimanded by a judge for withholding exculpatory evidence. Not the first time. In the end, Weissman got bailed out by his powerful friend, and his name was retroactively removed from the complaint. That's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to Weissman. And as part of the Enron scandal, remember Weissman's aggressive tactics? It caused the accounting firm, Anderson Accounting, to go out of business. It cost tens of thousands of jobs. People lost their jobs. Weissman secured a very controversial obstruction of justice conviction against Anderson. That was overturned by the Supreme Court, unanimous 9-0. He put 4 Merrill executives in jail for a year. Those convictions also overturned by the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. And the LA Times is reporting, as part of the Enron prosecution, Weissman named 114 people as unindicted co-conspirators. Now, why is that important? Because defense lawyers argued that by threatening these 114 people of prosecution, Weissman was able to block testimony that could have helped their clients. So, in other words, Weissman was once again basically withholding exculpatory evidence. It's hard to even fathom how anybody as corrupt and crooked as Weissman could ever be considered to be part of Mueller's special counsel team. He has so many red flags, yet Mueller took him on. He is his pit bull, and that alone ought to basically raise questions about Mueller's judgment. But then again, most of Mueller's team is filled with Democratic donors, so maybe that's what Mueller was going for all along. Here with reaction